So as Lawrence said, this project was conceived as a collaboration between the University of Winchester and the New Forest National Park Authority, with a great deal of help and support from Frank and Lawrence in the project design of it. It was conceived as a research project to tackle a particular research question in the archaeology of the forest, but also as a training project for Winchester students. Initially, I branded it as Archaeology of the Royal Hunting Lodges, plural. After 2 seasons, we're still looking at only one, so we dropped the plural. There's no evidence of it being royal, and I'm not even sure it's a hunting lodge. So, sort of hoist on my own petard, getting carried away with the branding process. But obviously this is an ongoing project. We've had 2 seasons now, don't yet have the results of the post-excavation analysis from the 2nd season, so this is sort of, ideas are still coming together, really. There we go. So apologies for the text-heavy slide. This is my nod to historians. The first recorded hunting lodge in the New Forest is that of King John's down at Bewley, which of course he then gave to the Cistercian order for the foundation of the abbey, and then relocated to Romsey. For much of the remainder of the 13th century, the keepership of the forest was actually in the hands of the reigning queen. And it's not until you get to Edward III in the sort of the middle quarter, whatever, the 14th century, that he kind of reclaims control of the forest from his queen. And then from 1358, he's very actively setting about a programme of works, constructing and or repairing a number of hunting lodges. And these are described in the History of the King's Works. So we have names such as De Parco, Hathborough, Studley, Helmsley, Houndsdown, New Lodge and Queenbower. Obviously some of these can be quite, with some degree of certainty, ascribed to known earthworks, and others there's rather more debate. So again, I appreciate, having sat at the back before, I appreciate that you won't be able to see this, so you have to take my word for it. So this is just basically a tabulation of the hunting lodge sites according to the Hants AHBR, so the ID numbers down the left-hand side, the lodge site, i.e. the name that they have today on the record, the parish they're situated in, and then the attempts to identify them with known sites from the royal records, court records. You'll see, assuming you can see it, that there's quite a lot of debate. Some of the sites are more are easier to assign to the sites named in the court rolls. So Studley and Studley Castle, Queenbower, Queenbower. Church Place, so-called Church Place 1, which is up in or near Ashurst, is quite likely to be associated with the hunting lodge known as Houndsdown, on account of it being quite close to the current place of Houndsdown. Some people have tried to claim that Church Place 2, which is close to Lyndhurst, might also be Houndsdown, but I think that's probably unlikely. Anyway, this is just to give you a sense of, this is an ongoing debate in terms of the known earthworks and the sites that are known from the various records. So, just to, so if you're not sure, this is the New Forest, you might recognise it. 19899 there is the site I'm going to talk about, which is Church Place 2. Church Place 1 is Ashurst up there. And it's interesting to note that there are at least 3 of the 7 or 8 lodges that have a church place or churchyard sort of modern name. This is primarily, it seems, because of this perception that when the forest was established and evil King William drives out all the existing parishes and tears down churches, that the earthworks that survived were associated with churches that had been pulled down. Obviously in these examples we know that that's not the case. Only one of them has been formally excavated before. That was Slowden by Hayward Sumner who seems to have sort of, in a break, a gap year perhaps between his Roman excavations, had a crack at Snowdon and failed to be particularly impressed by what he found and wrote it off as probably a prehistoric cattle enclosure. That was 1915, so it's a century, over a century since the last excavation of one of these sites. And his results were not particularly conclusive either way. One of the interesting aspects of the hunting lodges, certainly the ones that are perhaps bona fide royal hunting lodges, is the presence of building material like West Country slate, which is actually referred to in the royal records. So some of these hunting lodges actually, slate has been found either, normally just through sort of surface investigation, or where badgers have turned ground over or trees have gone over, and it's revealed some slate. But I think this is one of the things I want to come back to actually, is that when we talk about these hunting lodges, that they're actually not a single entity, a single type of earthwork or structure. There's actually appears to be a diversity of types. So just to get you bearings, we're there. Church Place 2 is there on the Bewley Road. So for those that know it, just where the road doglegs, and you go up towards Denny Wood campsite, just in there. And it's actually just sits within, just on the edge of the Denny enclosure. And you won't be able to see that, sorry. That's the OS depiction of the site. And one of the things, in plan, even though what's being found on the ground or observed on the ground can be quite different at these sites, in plan they actually seem fairly similar. They're sort of 30-40 metres squared, bank with an external ditch, not massive earthworks. I think they're sort of marking the space out rather than anything particularly defensive or containing about them. But in plan they look very similar. Whether they've been constructed to a designated plan, I'm not sure, or perhaps they've evolved from pre-existing foresters' lodges. But certainly when you look at them on the ground, they're actually rather different in character. This is the Lidar for Church Place 2, courtesy of the National Park Authority. Not to Frank and Lawrence. And actually, the hunting lodge shows up very clearly in this. I should say that that's a little bit deceptive, because on the ground it's really not a striking earthwork. We're not talking about Maiden Castle. It's very low bank, very shallow ditch. And so it's largely, I think, just marking out a territory. To the east of the road that comes off the Bewley Road, you've got a large sand quarry, and then you have Bronze Age barrow at the other side of that. And you can see this whole area, I've fiddled with the colour ramp a little bit to make it more obvious, is a reasonably low ridge that runs across, and to the north there you have the open forest and the heathland, and you actually would have had a very good clear field of view from the lodge site. One of the first things we did back in February 2016 was undertake a survey. Jack Powell, if he's still around, had done some geophysics survey as part of his dissertation at Bournemouth, and we decided to go start from scratch, largely because it gave us a training opportunity for our own students. We undertook a very detailed topo survey, quite a fine resolution. We added to this during the course of the excavation the following summer, so we got quite a good resolution on that. One of the things this shows is the damage, the erosion of some of the earthworks on this side. This is the area that's been kind of described as a gap entrance in the various sort of listing and scheduling documents. I'm jumping ahead a little bit now, but I'm not convinced that it is a gap entrance. I think what you can see here is sort of water runoff and erosion, and there is evidence of wheel rut damage as well to aspects of the earthwork. The resistivity survey doesn't show a great deal beyond the bank and the exterior ditch. Some suggestion of internal divisions, but we certainly weren't able to identify anything like that during the excavation. Most interesting, I think, and I will come back to this, is the GPR survey. The lodge doesn't really show up at all, but what does show up really nicely is this feature underlying the lodge, a depth of about a foot, about 30 to 40 centimetres, a significant curvilinear feature, possible causeways. So we'll come back to that, so hold that thought. So these are the trench locations for the 2 seasons of excavation that we undertook. They're quite sort of modest trenches. In actual fact, we were limited in terms of the scale of work that we can undertake. Obviously, it's a scheduled monument in a protected habitat site, and we had to open and close trenches by hand, which added a significant amount of extra time to the work that we did. So trench 1 down here, we looked at the supposed gap entrance to see if there was any evidence that the bank and ditch actually terminated or just petered out, whether there was any evidence of perhaps metalling or any kind of surface that might indicate that it was a thoroughfare. And we found nothing to indicate that that is actually a formal entrance into the site. And I think, as I say, I think that adds to this notion that actually that part of the site has been quite badly affected by erosion and toing and froing and all sorts of other things. As I say, it's the bank is sort of 40, 50 centimetres high, so it doesn't take a great deal over the centuries to erode that. And of course it's a sandy geology as well, so it's very soft. So trench 2 and trench 5 we put over the bank and ditch at 2 different points in 2016, and then we follow that up with trench 7 in the northeast corner. Obviously the aim of the game there was to try and recover material from the ditch fill, or preferably the in situ bank material that could give us a date for the construction of the earthwork. And trench 3 we were looking at sort of interior structures, targeting some of those hints of things in the resistivity. One of the problems we had is there were some very large trees in that sort of area, which meant that we couldn't look at the full extent of the enclosed space. Trench 4 and then trench 9 this year was targeted over really the earlier curvilinear feature. But sticking with the lodge for now, we had very little by way of material culture at all from it. I think in 2016 we had 8 pieces of pottery, bucket loads of burnt flint, and maybe something like 17 pieces of worked flint, which is quite nice. But we did get charcoal samples from the top of the bank in trench 5 and the base of the bank in trench 2. There has been no evidence from any of these trenches of internal structures. It's entirely possible that it's all in there underneath the great big beech trees. We had something that is potentially structural at that point, just into trench 6, north of trench 1. But it's really hard to make sense of. It's a small sort of cigar-shaped feature, packed full of gravel and clay, very compacted. It looks like it could be some kind of foundation, but it doesn't go anywhere. We know it doesn't run into trench 1 because we excavated that, and it stops. It's only, say, 1.5 meters long in trench 6. So its function, if it had a function, remains unclear. But that's all that we've had that might suggest any kind of structural activity, construction within the enclosed space. No indication of post holes or beam slots or anything of that more ephemeral nature either. So it remains a puzzle in many respects, but perhaps what's more revealing is what's not there. So compared to, say, Church Place 1, where there's the West Country slate, and Boulderwood, where there are significant structures, there is nothing to suggest that this site was actually built on or occupied for any length of time. And the pottery itself was fairly sort of coarse and very not royal in character. So this is just an example of the sections through the bank and ditch, and again, I say, it's not Maiden Castle. The bank is between 40 and 50 centimetres high. The ditch is correspondingly shallow. The interesting thing on the ground, actually, is you can see the corners of the lodge, the corners of the bank, are all of a greater height. And actually, it was Sumner who suggested this was simply an artefact of the way the ditch was dug, and the spoil was piled up on the bank from the ditch. But there's no evidence of let's say sort of occupation layers moving out inside of the enclosed space, and very little really of very shallow stratigraphy, full stop. And again, I apologise, when I put these slides together I hadn't realised how dark it would seem. This is, take my word for it, a photo of Trench 5, and it's supposed to be showing you the shallowness of the ditch, the bank material there. There is actually, in Trench 5, this is at the north of the site, there does appear to be a natural ridge that perhaps has been accentuated by the construction of the earthwork. So in terms of the results, as I said, we did not have a great deal of material culture, which certainly made managing the post-ex rather easier than it might have been otherwise. We retrieved a charcoal sample from the top of the bank material in Trench 5, and as I said, this was right on the top, so I wasn't hugely optimistic, but it was still a little bit disappointing to get a calibrated date of was it 1520 to 1937 from that charcoal. Started to wonder whether it was worth going back for a second season. But thankfully, the charcoal sample that we retrieved from within and towards the base of the bank deposit in Trench 2 gave us a really nice date. So 95.4% probability of a date between 1327 and 1450. That's calibrated. And a 91% probability that the date was actually between 1395 and 1450. So this fits really wonderfully well within the known records of this phase of lodge construction. The thing that it lacks, of course, is any evidence of high status use of the site, or indeed any longer term use of the site. Possibly rather more of a seasonal temporary encampment. The pottery was assessed by Lorraine Meckham of Wessex Archaeology, and let's say Seven Shirts. She was very kind and didn't charge us for the work. But although it's partly because of the acidic soil, the pottery does not survive well anyway, particularly the sort of coarser stuff at this site. Where she was able to identify likely fabric types or typologies, they were predominantly of the Laverstock courseware type, so again 13th to 15th century. One possible piece of fineware, but the rest really sort of quite coarse material. So I think, as I say again, I think what we're looking at here is something, if it is part of the hunting lodge kind of complex of sites, this, I think, is much more likely to be maybe some kind of ancillary encampment, maybe a beater's camp or something along those lines. But I don't know. It's really hard to judge. Certainly, the dates suggest, and the layout of the earthworks, the similarity with some of the other sites in plan, at least, suggest that this is part of that program of works. Maybe it was delineated by earthworks but never actually used as a site. So maybe it was just a temporary encampment, a very seasonal affair, and not used to the same extent as some of the other sites. Returning in conclusion to the curvilinear, ironically, as I said, we start off with this branding, archaeology of the Royal Hunting Lodges. Possibly the most interesting feature of the site has actually not been medieval at all. The curvilinear feature that showed up very nicely in the GPR is probably also the reason that we found probable evidence for a late Neolithic, early Bronze Age settlement. Again, this refers back to the other papers that have talked about absence of Neolithic. We may actually have a late Neolithic site here. The curvilinear runs underneath the hunting lodge. It's about 30 centimetres underneath the lodge. I have to say, without the GPR, I don't think we would have known it was there. There's no evidence. It's sealed by what seems to be either a wind-blown sand or a naturally formed soil. There's no evidence archaeologically. We only knew it was there because the GPR told us it was there. So we were very lucky in that point of view. One of the pieces of pottery that Lorraine looked at, and again, we're talking about small sherds, but she thinks quite likely that a fragment of domestic beaker ware. And of the worked flints that were looked at by Matt Levers, also of Wessex, there are some suggestions of Mesolithic worked flints, but there is also a significant quantity within the 15 worked flints that we had, of Neolithic, late Neolithic, early Bronze Age worked flint. And although we haven't had the post-ex done for this summer's work just yet, that will be coming shortly, certainly the evidence suggests that we have a very similar assemblage from this summer. So 13th, 15th century pottery and some quite nice worked flints, probably of the same period. So the next step will be to jettison the medieval altogether probably and focus on the prehistoric curvilinear. Thank you.